Thank you very much. I'm Solomon Dersso. I am a lecturer and a legal scholar, as well as analyst of peace and security issues in Africa. Currently, I also have been elected as a commissioner for the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. On today's discussion on third term debate, my position is that the third term limit or term limit generally in constitutions have been introduced in Africa as part of the process of the adoption of new constitutional reforms, as well as the reintroduction or the introduction of multi-party politics in Africa in the 1990s. And it is seen as a vehicle for deepening constitutionalism and for deepening the democratization process by allowing change of leadership within Africa on the part of African member states. And it is one of the institutional mechanisms that many states in Africa, about 33 of them at the time during the 1990s, have chosen it as one of the various institutional mechanisms for promoting and advancing constitutional rule, as well as the opportunity for competitive election, the opportunity for competitive leadership in the African context. It is therefore one of the most important elements of the democratization endeavor of many countries on the African continent, and one of the most important instruments for ensuring that people have the opportunity for infusing new thinking and new blood into the management of public affairs, and also it offers an opportunity for guarding the various ills that come with individuals staying too long in power, ills such as corruption, such as abuse of power, and also the evolution of exercise of power through a patrimonial and through a network system rather than through an institutionalized form that it is supposed to be. In terms of the democratization process, we see quite diverse trends. All right, you can pick up, for example, three trends. One is there are parts of the continent or those member states of the African Union who are making very commendable progress, okay, in terms of deepening and expanding the democratization process. So that's one. The second trend is what you may consider to be a situation where no progress is being made, a kind of a stalemate situation, okay, where the member states are basically, walking on the same place, okay, rather than moving forward. And then there is a third category that is the one basically going backward. All right, in countries where term limits have been changed or removed, okay, many of them actually fall in the category of countries that have seen perhaps a backward movement in terms of the democratization process. All right, so that is one of the things, one of the measures in terms of looking at progress or staying in the same place or basically going backward in terms of losing the gains that have been made in the constitutionalism and democratization process. So that is, okay, one of the things. The trend that you see is from 33 countries to about 18 countries have tried to change constitutional limits on presidential terms. Of the 18, the vast majority of them have succeeded in changing or removing term limits. All right? What that shows you is basically the process of changing term limits. The success rate is higher than the rate of failure of changing term limits. All right? And this is a worrying trend. A worrying trend. The most recent trend is basically in countries that try to change. The most worrying trend is the fact that changing term limits have become a trigger of instability and violence. So you can mention Niger in 2010, Burkina Faso in 2014, and then now Burundi, and we have already seen signs in the Democratic Republic of Congo as well. All right? So that is another important trend to look into, where it is becoming a trigger of instability and violence. As far as the normative position is concerned, the African Union, on the part of the African Union, there is nothing that prohibits the change of terms in constitutions. So changing term limits in constitutions, like any other part of the constitution of a country, is subject to the constitutional amendment process. All right? But the African Union had interest in, as far as the context and the purpose and the impact of changing term limits is concerned. And the most authoritative statement that comes closer to saying something about it is what is provided for in Article 23, Paragraph 5 of the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. And from that perspective, one thing that you see is that the African Union is taking the view that, despite the fact that changing term limits is a matter to be governed by the constitutional process of a country, it feels that it has to be done following the rules and procedures established in the Constitution. It has also to have the backing and support of the vast majority of people, and also it has to be done in a consensual process. Okay, that is one of the positions. So when, for example, changing term limits creates a situation that demands the intervention of the African Union, as provided under Article 24 of the African Charter on Democracy, Election and Governance, the African Union intervenes. And these are situations where the debate or the controversy on term limits triggers instability and violence. Okay, and that's why the African Union basically involved in Burkina Faso, involved in and also reacted to the situation in Burundi. And as far as the response mechanism is concerned, I think the lesson from Burkina Faso is that the timing of the response is very important. I think it would be of great value for the African Union to intervene before the situation reaches a crisis level. All right, when there are warnings that the situation is going to evolve into a crisis, into violence, then it's important for the African Union to see those warnings and then act on those warnings, respond timely, all right? So that, you know, there is a possibility of preventing it from evolving into chaos or violence. So that's one of the things. It can also, importantly, improve its normative posture by looking into, for example, the possibilities of the African Union laying down certain conditions that need to be complied with when countries are engaged in the revision of constitutions relating to term limits. The AU also can say it can engage in a kind of observation exercise, just the way it undertakes election observations. It can also undertake observation of revisions of constitutions, particularly those relating to term limits, in order to avoid the possibility of those debates leading to violence, leading to instability, and leading to the degradation of the democratization process in Africa. I think one of the things that we are witnessing of late is that there is increasing public opinion against term limits. And it is my expectation that the increasing public opinion against term limits would be deepened and would achieve the level of maturity that basically puts an end to this continuing trend of increasing number of countries removing or changing term limits. Well, I think if it is able to shape the process of constitutional revisions for changing term limits, if it shapes the process in such a way that the process wouldn't succeed, all right? So you follow the constitutional process. But if public opinion shapes that constitutional revision process in such a way that it fails, so that would be, I think, a good thing. So that's what we have seen in some of the countries where it didn't succeed, countries like Zambia, all right? And that is the expectation, that it contributes exactly to the possibility of not allowing those kinds of things from happening and giving the opportunity for the constitution basically to be respected and for change of leadership also to happen.